Well, thank you so much for having me and on this very important occasion. I really want to congratulate Dr. Patrick Veruyan and President Uhuru Kenyatta for the launch of this, and His Excellency Ban Ki-moon. It's a fantastic event, a fantastic day. I also want to congratulate my brother, Dr. Akin Adesina, for the way that he has taken on this challenge and put forward the resources or part of the resources needed to make this a reality. Today, I'd like to make four points on trade and climate. But the first one is really that we should think adaptation, and we must prioritize it in our response to the climate emergency. Last month, the scientific community confirmed what most of us already know. Climate change is here. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, and that global surface temperatures will continue to increase until at least the mid-century. Global efforts to address the climate emergency must equally focus on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Indeed, failure to adapt to climate change and build resilience will lead to a devastating loss of life and livelihoods around the world, worse than what we have seen in this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that Patrick laid it out very clearly what this will mean for Africa. We must therefore mainstream climate adaptation and resilience into every sector and every decision we make. Let me again congratulate the Global Center for Adaptation for its significant contribution to accelerate action and support for adaptation solutions. The World Trade Organization looks forward to working closely with you at the GCA, with governments and other partners to support these objectives. I was very pleased that the WTO Secretariat, for the first time, has contributed a chapter on trade to the State and Trends in Adaptation in Africa Report 2020. This, I hope, is just the start of the collaboration between the WTO and the Global Center for Adaptation. Adaptation to climate change must be a priority for every government, every organization, and putting in place the relevant policy frameworks, including for trade, to reflect all of this. The WTO can make a significant contribution to the climate agenda in 3 areas that will be crucial to buttress our climate adaptation efforts at the upcoming COP26 and beyond. The first is ensuring that supply chains are resilient, and this should be a key component of countries' adaptation strategies. International trade and supply chains are an insurance policy against climate risks and must form part of national adaptation strategies. Open trade is indispensable to cushion against and adapt to the negative impacts of climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that global supply chains are a source of strength, not weakness. However, supply chains are also vulnerable to disruption, as we see. It is therefore imperative that we make global supply chains as resilient as possible so we can withstand the changes in our climate system. Making supply chains resilient will require a global effort to climate-proof transport and other key trade-related infrastructure. To cope with heat and humidity extremes, multiple locations around the world, including in Africa, will require substantial investment in transport, as well as energy and communications infrastructure. The same can be said about seaports coping with rising sea levels. The WTO-led Aid for Trade initiative can help mobilize investment in climate-resilient infrastructure. Aid for Trade to build energy, transport, and telecommunications infrastructure amounted to $25 billion in 2019, representing 55% of overall Aid for Trade disbursements. This is an opportunity we must seize for building resilience. Strengthening regional integration and supply chains further bolsters against climate risks through economic diversification. Putting all our eggs in one basket is not a recipe for agility or resilience. Investment in regional value chains and regional trade provides opportunities to diversify trade, share tasks, and manage adaptation challenges. For instance, as climate change causes crop yields to fall, open and reliable agricultural trade will be crucial for hunger-affected and import-dependent regions, such as certain parts of the continent. There is therefore an opportunity to achieve the twin goals of economic integration and climate resilience through investment in climate-proof transport and connectivity infrastructure. My second point is that climate adaptation plans need to rely on trade liberalization to ensure that every climate finance dollar goes further. The WTO can help lower barriers to trade for goods, services, and technologies that are essential for adaptation. Lowering trade barriers helps to stretch each dollar of adaptation finance further. This makes it more affordable to invest in cutting-edge technologies for addressing risks from sea level rise, drought, extreme weather events, and floods, or for climate-proofing infrastructure. In a similar way, during the pandemic, we have seen WTO members streamline their trade policies to speed up access to essential medical supplies like vaccines. If we focus on Africa, eliminating barriers to trade in adaptation goods and services would significantly reduce the cost of meeting the continent's adaptation priorities. To give an example, import tariffs levied on goods relevant to adaptation, we have an illustrative list of 56 of these goods, average close to 10% in many African countries, with tariffs sometimes going as high as 50% in some countries. In terms of Africa's energy security, 70% of Africa's energy is generated through hydropower, which is exposed to significant climate risks. Meanwhile, the whole of Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, my country, has an installed capacity for electricity that is almost equivalent to what we have at London Heathrow. Thus, trade opening must be used as part of the solution for diversifying and enhancing low-carbon energy supply in Africa. My third point is that international cooperation must be intensified to ensure that climate adaptation efforts are effective and widespread, and the WTO stands ready to contribute to this objective. Governments across the world must join forces with all the relevant stakeholders, including the private sector and civil society, to put in place comprehensive adaptation strategies. In this context, we should ensure that trade policies are fully aligned with climate adaptation strategies. Trade and the WTO have a key role to play here in delivering affordable and accessible climate adaptation solutions. Indeed, the WTO promotes stable and predictable global trade to speed up dissemination of adaptation technologies. WTO monitors and enhances transparency of supply chains, which facilitates trade and investment and enables the smooth flow of needed goods and services. We can use the WTO's Aid for Trade initiative to marshal investments in climate resilient infrastructure. We meet at a crossroads for climate change and trade. COP26 and the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference will both take place in the coming weeks. COP26 is an opportunity to make great strides in building global adaptation capacity. The blueprint for adaptation actions for the African continent set out in this report is vitally important, and trade and the WTO can help realize these goals. We look forward to working with you. In turn, at the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference, WTO members are working on various initiatives to promote the role of trade in addressing climate change and other environmental challenges. Both venues will allow us to make trade a force for climate adaptation. The WTO stands ready to continue serving the international community in the fight against climate change. Thank you. And it's been an honor to join you.